In the early 2000s, something strange happened in the skies. An Airbus A320 sold to China completely disappeared. It wasn't hijacked, it wasn't destroyed, and it wasn't lost in a storm. It just vanished. No radar trace, no flight logs, no passengers. $100 million commercial jet gone without explanation. For years, Airbus executives were baffled. They checked flight registries, searched maintenance hangars, and combed through customs records. Nothing. The aircraft had fallen off the map. Then, almost 20 years later, intelligence reports surfaced that shocked the entire aviation world. The missing Airbus hadn't crashed. It had been quietly dismantled in a Chinese facility. Every panel removed, every circuit analyzed, every part reverse engineered. That single act would spark one of the boldest industrial gambles in modern history. From the bones of that missing aircraft, China built its dream project, the Comac C919. A passenger jet designed to break the monopoly of Airbus and Boeing and to prove that China could dominate the skies on its own terms. But what followed was not triumph. It was a spectacular backfire that revealed how far ambition can fall when shortcuts replace innovation. To understand why this matters, you need to know how power works in the air. For decades, two names ruled everything: Airbus and Boeing. Together, they controlled over 90% of global passenger aircraft. Every airline in the world relied on them. It wasn't just business, it was dominance. Their engineering, safety data, and manufacturing systems took half a century to perfect. They didn't build planes, they built trust. China wanted in. Every year, it spent billions buying Western jets, and every one of those purchases reminded Beijing how dependent it was on foreign technology. So, in 2008, the government launched an audacious plan: create a national aircraft manufacturer capable of competing head-to-head with the West. They called it Comac, the Commercial Aircraft Corporation of China. Its mission: design a single-aisle airliner to rival the A320 and the 737. The chosen name, C919, carried symbolism. C stood for China. The number 9 signified eternity in Chinese culture. 19 stood for the century of its rise. It was supposed to mark a new chapter of national pride. But Comac faced an impossible challenge. Building a modern jetliner is one of the hardest things humanity does. Each plane is made of millions of parts, everyone tested, certified, and verified. The slightest defect can cost lives. Airbus and Boeing took generations to master that process. Comac had never done it before. That's when the shortcuts began. French intelligence later revealed that the missing Airbus A320 had been taken apart in a facility in Jiangsu province. Engineers studied it down to the smallest rivet. They scanned its frame, copied its control systems, and logged every dimension. Officially, the operation was called training. Unofficially, it was one of the largest cases of reverse engineering in aviation history. Patrick Devaux, a former Airbus executive, later admitted that the resemblance between the A320 and the C919 was too close to ignore. Same fuselage shape, same cockpit design, even similar instrument placement. Airbus could have filed a global complaint, but they didn't, because China wasn't just a competitor, it was one of their biggest customers. Billions in future orders were at stake. So Airbus stayed silent, and silence was as good as permission. By 2015, the C919 was ready for its debut. Under the spotlight of global media, China rolled out its first homegrown airliner. The crowd erupted. It looked sleek, polished, confident. State media called it a triumph of Chinese engineering. The message was clear: China had arrived in the aerospace elite. But beneath the patriotic paint job was a secret the audience never saw. More than 90% of the aircraft's components came from Western companies. The engines were from GE and Safran. The avionics were from Honeywell. The hydraulics from Parker. The landing gear from Liebherr. Even the flight control computers were American. The so-called domestic aircraft was essentially a global kit plane assembled in Shanghai. Still, Comac pressed forward. China's state airlines placed hundreds of orders, and newspapers hailed the project as a turning point for national independence. But success in aviation isn't about optimism. It's about performance, reliability, and trust. And that's where the dream began to fall apart. The first problem was performance. On paper, the C919 promised to match the A320. In the air, It couldn't. The engines designed for Comac were not the same as those on Western jets. Export restrictions forced manufacturers to supply downgraded versions with older cores and less thrust. The result was shorter range, higher fuel burn, and limited payload capacity. Every flight cost more to operate than an Airbus. In commercial aviation, a 2% efficiency loss can destroy profitability. The C919 started 10% behind. The second problem was reliability. Airbus and Boeing didn't just sell planes, they built ecosystems. Global maintenance hubs, supply chains, and thousands of certified technicians supported their fleets. Comac had none of that. Spare parts were scarce, service centers were limited, and technical issues meant grounding aircraft for weeks. Then politics made everything worse. When the United States added Comac to its military end-user list in 2020, Western suppliers froze deliveries. Engine shipments stalled. Avionics systems were delayed. Comac's dream of independence suddenly depended on export licenses from the very countries it wanted to surpass. The aircraft that was supposed to prove China's self-sufficiency was now at the mercy of foreign regulators. But the third problem was the one China couldn't control: trust. Airlines buy more than metal. They buy reputation, safety records, and confidence. Every Boeing and Airbus aircraft comes with decades of verified performance data and hundreds of millions of flight hours. Comac had none. For international carriers, flying an unproven jet from a government-run company tied to military oversight was a risk no insurance firm wanted to underwrite. Outside China, not a single major airline placed a purchase. Meanwhile, inside China, the propaganda machine kept running. The C919 was paraded as a symbol of defiance, the embodiment of national pride. But the rest of the world saw it differently, a copy of Western technology dressed as innovation. Then came the discovery that turned speculation into proof. In 2021, satellite images revealed a stripped Airbus A320 lying in a field in eastern China. No engines, no windows, no markings. Investigators confirmed it was the same aircraft that had vanished almost 2 decades earlier. What Airbus had lost, Comac had copied. To the West, it was a smoking gun. To Beijing, it was evidence of progress. Two sides of the same story, but only one truth. Copying doesn't make you a competitor, it makes you dependent. As testing continued, the flaws became impossible to hide. Delays mounted, certification dragged on. Engineers struggled to fix stability issues and software bugs. Each time one problem was solved, 2 more appeared. The goalposts kept moving. The C919 was supposed to enter service in 2016. It didn't. Then 2019. Still nothing. When it finally received limited certification years later, production was painfully slow. In aviation, reputation spreads faster than lift. Airlines talk, pilots talk. By the time the C919 made its first official flight with China Eastern Airlines, global buyers had already moved on. Airbus had a 10-year backlog of orders. Boeing, despite its crises, still dominated fleets worldwide. Comac's pitch of being the third major player now sounded hollow. Airlines don't gamble on new manufacturers, they rely on history. Airbus and Boeing earned their dominance through decades of innovation, failure, and recovery. Comac wanted to skip that part. But innovation doesn't work like that. You can't copy decades of experience in a lab. You can't reverse engineer trust. The irony was brutal. While China tried to break free from foreign dependence, Airbus quietly expanded its own footprint inside China. They opened assembly plants, joint ventures, and partnerships with local firms. Beijing had hoped to replace Airbus. Instead, it became one of Airbus's biggest markets. China's attempt to outsmart its rival had made the rival stronger. Airbus executives never gloated publicly. They didn't need to. Every new order from a Chinese airline spoke louder than words. Comac had spent billions chasing parity, only to reinforce the very monopoly it set out to destroy. But inside China, the government couldn't admit defeat. State media doubled down on triumph narratives. They showcased ceremonies, pilots smiling in front of cameras, and jets rolling down runways like heroes in uniform. What they didn't show were the missing pieces: the dependence on Western parts, the slow production, the export bans tightening like a noose. Even today, more than 90% of the C919's core systems rely on Western suppliers. Every major technological artery of the aircraft flows through companies in Europe and America. One political decision, one embargo, could ground the entire fleet overnight. Yet the story doesn't end here. Because as the world would soon see, China's pursuit of aviation dominance was about to collide head-on with the one thing even money and power can't buy: credibility. Credibility isn't built in boardrooms or by government decree. It's earned in flight hours, in the quiet moments when a jet climbs through turbulence and the passengers never think twice about their safety. That's what Airbus and Boeing mastered: predictability. Comac hadn't earned that yet. Every test flight carried the weight of a reputation still under construction. When the first commercial C919 entered service, Beijing celebrated as if it had conquered gravity itself. Cameras followed the maiden flight like it was the moon landing. Pilots waved, crowds cheered, and news anchors declared that a new era had begun. But behind the scenes, engineers were worried. The plane had cleared certification, yes, but only under Chinese regulators. International validation from Europe or the United States was still missing. Without it, the C919 could not legally operate in most of the world's skies. Airlines noticed. So did investors. Aviation is one of the most globally scrutinized industries on Earth. A single fault can bankrupt a company or destroy confidence for decades. Boeing learned that the hard way with the 737 MAX crisis. For Comac, one accident could erase 20 years of effort overnight. That kind of risk made global carriers hesitate. They weren't just buying a plane, they were buying accountability, transparency, and a promise of safety tested over millions of flights. Comac could only promise ambition. While Beijing tried to convince the world that the C919 was ready for export, Airbus and Boeing quietly strengthened their grip. Airbus built new assembly lines in Tianjin, effectively turning part of China into an extension of its own production network. Each new facility created Chinese jobs, trained Chinese engineers, and deepened economic ties. Boeing followed a similar path, outsourcing limited components to Chinese firms. The strategy was simple. If China wanted to build planes, Airbus and Boeing would make sure those planes still depended on Western technology. It worked. Instead of replacing the duopoly, China became part of it. Every attempt to nationalize aviation independence only pulled Comac deeper into the same system it hoped to escape. The more it tried to compete, the more dependent it became. At first, the Chinese government poured money into the problem. Billions in subsidies kept the factories running. State airlines were ordered to buy domestic, no matter the cost. But you can't subsidize reputation. Global aviation runs on reliability, not slogans. A plane that spends more time being repaired than flying is a liability, no matter who built it. By 2022, production data leaked showing that Comac had completed fewer than 20 aircraft since its founding. Boeing and Airbus each delivered more than 600 in the same year. The contrast was humiliating. Even if Comac ramped up production tenfold, it would take decades to catch up. Meanwhile, Western manufacturers were already planning the next generation of aircraft: lighter composites, hybrid propulsion, and fully digital cockpits. Comac's proud creation was already outdated before it reached mass production. Inside the industry, engineers joked that the C919 wasn't competing with the A320neo. It was competing with the A320 from the 1990s. But for Beijing, admitting that would be political suicide. The project had become a national symbol, a test of pride against the West. No one could question it publicly. So, they did what governments often do when faced with failure. They doubled down. New announcements claimed that Comac was developing a wide-body jet to rival the Boeing 787. They called it the CR929, a partnership with Russia's United Aircraft Corporation. On paper, it looked ambitious. In reality, it was desperation disguised as progress. Both partners faced sanctions, both lacked independent engine technology, and both relied on Western suppliers who were now pulling away. The collaboration stumbled before it even took off. Deadlines slipped, funding dried up, and the CR929 became another headline project with no clear future. Meanwhile, Airbus played the long game. By keeping its relationships inside China friendly, it ensured continued access to the world's fastest-growing aviation market. The more Comac struggled, the more Chinese airlines ordered from Airbus. It was a masterclass in strategic patience. Every failure of the C919 reminded Chinese carriers that reliability still came from Europe and America. Boeing, despite its own troubles, benefited too. Western regulators might argue publicly, but in private, they shared a common goal: maintain technological control of commercial aviation. The duopoly wasn't just economic, it was geopolitical. Whoever dominates the skies controls logistics, travel, and influence. China's attempt to rewrite that balance had backfired into deeper dependence. By 2023, Comac's problems were no longer secrets. Leaked pilot reports mentioned handling quirks, software glitches, and supply shortages. Maintenance crews complained about spare part delays measured in months. For an airline trying to operate on thin margins, that was catastrophic. Every grounded aircraft meant millions lost. Some Chinese carriers quietly limited the jet to short-haul domestic routes where risk and exposure were minimal. The aircraft that was meant to take China global was now confined largely to its own airspace. In Europe, Airbus executives could hardly believe their luck. Without firing a shot, they had turned a potential rival into a dependent client. The same nation that dismantled their plane had become their largest assembly hub. Every C919 that rolled out indirectly fueled Airbus's dominance, because the world saw what happened when someone tried to copy them instead of out-innovate them. But here's where the story turns from economics to something deeper. The C919 wasn't just about airplanes, it was about identity. China's rise has been built on mastering and replicating Western technology, electronics, cars, phones, trains. But aviation is different. It demands a level of precision and accountability that money and manpower alone can't buy. You can mass-produce phones with small defects. You can't mass-produce planes with small defects. The aerospace industry measures progress not in patents, but in hours of flawless flight. Airbus earned those hours through decades of iteration. Comac wanted to skip the suffering and go straight to success. But skipping the suffering also skips the learning. Reverse engineering builds machines. Experience builds mastery. The irony is that China already had what it needed to succeed: talent, funding, and political will. What it lacked was patience. The drive to announce victory before achieving it doomed the project from the start. Propaganda became a substitute for engineering. The photo of a jet taxiing down a runway was worth more to officials than the data proving it could compete. When global aviation experts reviewed the C919's public specifications, the consensus was almost universal. The aircraft wasn't a disaster, but it wasn't revolutionary either. It was competent, not exceptional; adequate, not inspiring. And in a world where airlines chase efficiency down to the decimal point, adequate doesn't sell. By 2024, Airbus had surpassed expectations, delivering record numbers of A320neos to meet skyrocketing global demand. Comac, meanwhile, was still fine-tuning basic systems. Western sanctions tightened on advanced chip exports, crippling China's access to next-generation flight computers. Every step forward came with 3 new obstacles. In desperation, Chinese media started comparing the C919 to older Airbus models, moving the goalposts lower each year. But the global audience wasn't fooled. The C919 symbolized not independence, but imitation. And in the modern world, imitation without innovation is fragility. Inside Europe, defense analysts quietly celebrated. The failure of the C919 meant Western aerospace superiority would remain intact for at least another generation. Airbus could continue innovating without fear of being undercut by cheap copies. Boeing could recover from its internal crises without facing a serious new rival. China's big play to control the skies had instead reinforced Western dominance. Yet even in failure, the C919 teaches something powerful. It shows how technology is more than hardware. It's trust, collaboration, and the invisible architecture of knowledge passed from engineer to engineer across decades. That can't be stolen. It has to be earned. Every nation that tried to shortcut that process, whether through espionage, forced tech transfer, or reverse engineering, eventually learned the same lesson. Mastery demands humility. It demands time. You can't rush excellence, and you can't fake history. As the C919 continues its slow rollout, the world watches politely, but without interest. No one outside China is lining up to buy. The aircraft may fly, but the dream behind it has already crashed. Airbus, meanwhile, is soaring higher than ever. The company that China tried to undermine now dominates both Western and Eastern markets. Factories in Europe, North America, and China itself operate in perfect sync, producing jets faster than any competitor in history. The duopoly that China wanted to break has never been stronger. Beijing won't admit it publicly, but inside Comac's walls, engineers know the truth. The C919 achieved flight, but not freedom. Every system still traces back to the countries it was meant to replace. Independence, it turns out, can't be reverse engineered. In a way, the story comes full circle. The missing Airbus that vanished all those years ago was supposed to be the beginning of China's aerospace revolution. Instead, it became the ghost haunting every hangar. Proof that copying success is easy. Sustaining it is not. The aviation world learned something too. Real innovation doesn't fear imitation. It thrives on it. Airbus and Boeing saw China's attempt not as theft, but as validation, a reminder that their decades of research were still the global benchmark. As China continues to push forward, the West will keep watching, because ambition like this never ends quietly. The next chapter may involve hypersonic travel, electric propulsion, or entirely new manufacturing methods. And when it does, China will try again. The difference next time will decide everything. Will they keep chasing shortcuts, or finally learn the lesson the sky has been teaching since the Wright brothers? That progress comes not from imitation, but from iteration. In the race to rule the skies, copying someone else's blueprint only ensures one thing: you'll always be flying in their shadow.